Here is something that happens more often than most people realize. Someone comes in with blood pressure sitting at 160/95. When you start asking questions, the answers are almost always the same. They eat well, home-cooked meals, no added salt. They walk every day. They might even be on a blood pressure medication that just is not doing enough. On paper, this person is doing everything right. Diet, exercise, medication, all of it. And yet the numbers are still high. That is one of the most frustrating things to see, because this person is not cutting corners. They have followed every piece of advice they were given, and the reward they were expecting, which is normal blood pressure, just never came. So they try harder, cut out even more salt, add extra cardio, eat even cleaner, and still, the readings barely move. What almost nobody tells them is that something else is happening in the background. There is a hormonal system that gets activated every few hours throughout the day, and it is quietly telling the kidneys to hold on to sodium, regardless of how little salt is in the diet. Most people have no idea it is even happening, and that is exactly what we are going to talk about today. Not a new supplement, not another list of foods to avoid. We are going to talk about timing, specifically whether the body ever gets a real chance to reset the systems that control blood pressure in the first place. If that sounds like something worth understanding, drop a comment below and let me know you are watching. It helps more than you might think. Now let us start with something that trips up a lot of people who are genuinely trying to do the right thing. The people I am describing are not eating junk food. They have cut out processed foods. They are choosing whole grains, lean protein, plenty of vegetables. They are sleeping reasonably well, and they are still coming in with blood pressure numbers that should not be where they are. What tends to happen next is that they assume they need to do even more of the same. Restrict salt further, exercise longer, and after all of that, the blood pressure still does not budge. The reason this happens is that blood pressure, for most people, is not simply a volume problem. The traditional thinking is that less sodium means less water retention, which means less volume in the bloodstream, which should mean lower pressure. That works for some people. But for many others, the pressure is being driven by hormonal systems that are supposed to rise and fall throughout the day, but are instead staying elevated almost continuously. When that happens, the pressure system never gets a chance to stand down. So let us talk about insulin. And not in the way most people have heard about it. Most conversations about insulin focus on how much the body is making, whether you are insulin resistant, whether your blood sugar is too high. All of that matters. But when it comes to blood pressure, what matters just as much is the pattern of insulin release throughout the day. Insulin is designed to spike when you eat, do its job of moving glucose into the cells, and then fall back down to baseline once that job is done. That rise and fall signals multiple systems throughout the body about what state you are in right now. When insulin rises, it tells the kidneys to hold on to sodium. It tells the nervous system to stay a little more active. It tells the blood vessels to be in a certain mode of readiness. All of that is completely appropriate when it is happening in response to a meal and then resolving a few hours later. The problem starts when insulin never falls. When it stays elevated for 12, 14, or even 16 hours a day because you are eating or drinking something that triggers it every 2 to 3 hours from morning until bedtime, things begin to shift. Modern eating habits have made this the default for most people. Breakfast, a mid-morning snack, lunch, an afternoon snack, dinner, an evening snack. Even if every one of those occasions involves healthy food, you are still triggering insulin release 6 or 7 times a day. And because those occasions are spaced close enough together, insulin never fully returns to baseline before the next one arrives. What that creates is a state of chronic low-grade insulin elevation, not high enough to cause obvious symptoms, not high enough to show up as diabetes on a blood test, but high enough to fundamentally change how the kidneys, the blood vessels, and the nervous system behave over weeks, months, and years. Research published in the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism has shown that even in people without diabetes, frequent eating throughout the day results in sustained insulin levels that prevent the normal rise and fall the body was designed to follow. A hormone that never falls behaves very differently from one that rises briefly and then resolves. When insulin is chronically elevated, the kidneys interpret that as a continuous signal to retain sodium. The sympathetic nervous system interprets it as a reason to stay more active than it should be at rest. The inner lining of the blood vessels does not get the periods of relaxation it needs to stay flexible and healthy. Each of those things individually nudges blood pressure upward. Combined, they create a situation where pressure stays elevated even when you are not eating too much sodium, even when you are exercising, even when you are doing most of the things that are supposed to help. Now let us get specific about the kidneys, because this is really where blood pressure regulation lives. The kidneys are incredibly sophisticated, but they do not have eyes. They cannot see whether the food you just ate came from a salad bar or a drive-thru. What they respond to are hormonal signals. When insulin is elevated, the kidneys receive a very clear instruction: retain sodium. Work published in Hypertension, the Journal of the American Heart Association, has shown that insulin directly stimulates a specific channel in the kidneys that increases sodium reabsorption, independent of how much sodium is actually in the diet. This mechanism was designed for a world where eating was intermittent, where long stretches between meals gave insulin plenty of time to fall back down. In that context, the sodium retention was temporary and self-correcting. But when insulin is elevated continuously, that temporary retention becomes permanent. The kidneys stay locked in retention mode regardless of how much sodium is coming in through the diet. This is why someone can follow a very low sodium diet and still have persistently high blood pressure. If the hormonal signal telling the kidney to retain sodium is always on, cutting dietary sodium is like trying to drain a bathtub while the faucet is still running. You might slow the rate it fills, but you will never empty it as long as that water keeps coming. This also explains something that confuses a lot of people. Blood pressure is often higher in the morning than in the evening, with spikes that seem to come from nowhere. A late-night snack, even something as simple as a piece of fruit, can keep insulin elevated into the early morning hours. The kidneys are still in sodium retention mode when you wake up. That shows up as morning hypertension, and most people have no idea why. There is another piece to this that tends to surprise people, and it has to do with what is happening on the inside regardless of what things look like on the outside. Most of us assume that a normal weight and regular exercise mean the internal systems are working well. That assumption is often wrong. Researchers have found that a significant number of people have excess fat packed around their internal organs even when their overall weight looks normal. A study of over 3,000 participants found that approximately 1 in 4 people with a normal body weight had metabolic abnormalities, including insulin resistance and elevated blood pressure. This internal fat interferes with how the liver handles insulin and drives chronically elevated insulin levels throughout the day. You can have a normal weight, you can be exercising regularly, and you can still have a liver that is quietly driving insulin resistance and pushing blood pressure higher. This is especially common in women going through menopause, who often gain internal fat even when overall weight stays the same, as well as in people who are chronically sleep deprived or who regularly drink even moderate amounts of alcohol. All of these can shift the metabolic environment in ways that drive blood pressure up, even in people who appear healthy from the outside. So let us name this clearly. The one mistake that keeps blood pressure elevated in many health-conscious people, even those eating well and exercising and doing most things right, is constant feeding. It is eating or drinking something that stimulates insulin frequently enough throughout the day that insulin never has a chance to drop back to baseline. That is the mechanism. That is what is driving persistently elevated blood pressure in a large number of people who would otherwise appear to be in good health. This shows up in a few different ways. The most obvious is grazing. Eating small amounts throughout the day because you were told that eating frequently keeps your metabolism going or stabilizes blood sugar. What the body actually needs is long enough breaks between meals for insulin to fall, for the kidneys to release sodium, and for the blood vessels to relax. The less obvious version is liquid calories. A smoothie mid-morning, a protein shake after exercise, a glass of orange juice with lunch, a glass of wine in the evening. Each of those might seem harmless, but from an insulin standpoint, they are all stimuli. Liquid carbohydrates and proteins are absorbed faster than solid food, which means a sharper insulin spike and a longer elevated period after you finish the drink. Then there is the category of healthy snacks. A handful of almonds, a piece of fruit, some crackers with nut butter. None of those are bad foods. But if they are happening between meals, they are extending the window of insulin elevation and preventing the body from entering the fasted state where the kidneys finally get the signal to release sodium. Late night eating is particularly problematic because it extends insulin elevation into the hours when the body is supposed to be in deep metabolic rest. When you eat close to bedtime, insulin stays elevated for several hours afterward, the kidneys retain sodium overnight, and the nervous system does not fully wind down during sleep. Over time, this sets the baseline blood pressure higher than it should be, and you wake up every morning already starting from an elevated position rather than from a true resting baseline. The common thread through all of these patterns is frequency. It is not about eating too much. It is not even necessarily about eating the wrong foods. It is about never giving the body a long enough break from insulin secretion for the pressure regulating systems to reset. Because insulin is invisible, you cannot feel it rising and falling the way you feel hunger. Most people have no idea this is happening. What makes this especially difficult today is that the environment has been engineered around constant feeding, food is available everywhere, snacking has been normalized, and even the healthy options are packaged for portability and marketed as essential fuel. The infrastructure of modern life is built around the assumption that we should always be eating, but the hormonal systems in the body were designed for a world where long gaps between meals were completely normal. So what is the solution? This is not about extreme dieting or fasting for days. What I am saying is that if you want to address one of the underlying drivers of elevated blood pressure, you need to create windows of time during the day when insulin can genuinely fall, not just a little lower than an hour ago. Actually low, back to baseline. The simplest approach is to compress your eating into a narrower window during the day. If you are currently eating across a 16-hour stretch, try bringing that down to 10 or 12 hours. That might mean skipping the mid-morning snack, having your first meal a little later, or finishing dinner earlier and not eating anything after that. The exact structure matters less than the principle, which is to create a continuous block of time each day, ideally 8 to 12 hours, where you are not consuming anything that triggers insulin. Research published in Cell Metabolism showed that restricting eating to a 10-hour window, without changing what or how much people ate, resulted in meaningful reductions in blood pressure, better cholesterol, and improved blood sugar regulation. During that fasting window, insulin falls, the kidneys receive the signal to release sodium, blood volume normalizes, and pressure drops. The nervous system settles, and the blood vessels get a chance to relax. All of these changes happen automatically once the hormonal environment is right. You just have to stop doing the things that are preventing them from happening. Sleep is another non-negotiable piece of this. Sleep is when insulin sensitivity restores itself and the body performs its hormonal repair. Research has shown that just 4 nights of sleep restriction can reduce insulin sensitivity by approximately 30% in healthy adults. If you are chronically undersleeping, even if you are doing everything else right, you are working uphill the entire time. Let me bring this back to what actually happens in practice. People come in with blood pressure in the 160s, already on medication that is not doing enough. When you dig into their history, what you often find is a genuinely healthy diet and regular exercise, but they are eating continuously throughout the day. Breakfast, a snack, lunch, a snack, dinner, a snack. Insulin is elevated for 14 to 16 hours and the kidneys never get the signal to release sodium. Something else worth noting is that when the underlying insulin pattern is addressed, medications often start working better. If you are on a blood pressure medication, that drug works by interfering with the mechanisms that raise pressure. But if chronic insulin elevation is still acting as a continuous upstream driver, you are asking the medication to fight against a signal that never stops. When the insulin pattern improves, the medications do not have to work as hard. Always talk with your doctor before making any changes, but lifestyle and medication are not competing approaches. They work better together. Elevated blood pressure is not just a number on a monitor. It is a direct measure of the mechanical stress the cardiovascular system is under every single day. When pressure is chronically elevated, the heart has to work harder, the blood vessel walls are damaged over time, and the kidneys are exposed to pressures that accelerate their decline. The risk of heart attack, stroke, and kidney disease all go up. What is less appreciated is that the same mechanisms driving elevated blood pressure are also driving other conditions. Insulin resistance, nervous system overactivity, and blood vessel dysfunction are the same core dysfunction underlying type 2 diabetes, fatty liver disease, and cognitive decline as we age. An analysis published in Diabetes Care examining data from over 100,000 participants confirmed that insulin resistance is independently associated with increased cardiovascular risk even in people without diabetes. When you address the root cause, you are not just lowering blood pressure, you are reducing risk across every major chronic condition that shortens life and limits quality of life over time. So let us bring this full circle. Blood pressure does not stay elevated because you are eating the wrong ingredients. It does not stay high because you lack discipline. It often stays high because the hormonal system that controls pressure never gets a chance to reset. For many people who are genuinely trying to stay healthy, the reason that reset never happens is not that they are doing the wrong things, it is that they are doing the right things at the wrong frequency. You can eat whole foods, you can exercise, you can manage stress, you can sleep reasonably well, and still have persistently elevated blood pressure if you are eating or drinking something that stimulates insulin every 2 to 3 hours throughout the entire day. Because when insulin is chronically elevated, the kidneys retain sodium regardless of how little salt you are eating. The nervous system stays activated regardless of how calm you feel. The blood vessels lose their ability to relax regardless of how fit you are. And all of that shows up as blood pressure that seems resistant to everything you have tried. The solution is not more restriction. It is not cutting out more foods or adding more cardio. The solution may be something simpler than that. Giving the body the time it needs to reset. Creating windows during the day when insulin is genuinely low, when the kidneys can release sodium, when the nervous system can settle, when the blood vessels can do their job. That might mean compressing your eating into a narrower window, cutting out snacks between meals, finishing dinner earlier and not eating again until the next day. The exact approach will look different for different people, but the principle is always the same. Fix the signal timing and the pressure system can finally stand down. If this opened your eyes to something you had not considered before, please share this with someone you care about. You probably know at least one person who is doing everything they were told and still struggling with their numbers. And if that is you, drop a comment below and tell me what city or state you are watching from. I read every single one.